Okay, we're going to start off today with an update from Daryl on the interesting events that have occurred with him in the last week or so. There is a rather in-depth conversation that was recorded between Daryl and Chris recently. Is that online yet?
No, it'll be online as soon as we can today. We've just been gathering a few bits and pieces for it. We've got a picture of Daryl actually walking out of a security facility, shall we call it? Mm-hmm. And then... So
today you're going to give a synopsis of what took place, yeah?
We get a synopsis. We get the thumbnail version of what took place because it's a nice long interview that we did with lots of detail, because there is lots of ins and outs to what happened, and a couple of very, very obvious reasons for what happened, which are what we'll discuss here. We obviously don't have time on the show to go through it all, but I'd encourage people to listen to the interview, because what's going on here with both Daryl and with our other guests, Scott and Uwe, is we're watching the system unravel in front of us, and documenting it as we go along. So, do you want me to speak to Daryl about this, Lisa? We can.
Yes, let's kick it off.
Let's kick it off now. Daryl's to thumbnail it for people who aren't aware. Daryl's been waging a one-man battle against the system, shall we call it, in Canada to bring things out into the open, into the public, and actually put several of his own properties deliberately into foreclosure, which is also what Uwe did, and we'll speak about that when we get to Uwe and Scott. And in the process of going through the legal procedures, clearly identified the points at which the actual system is committing complete fraud upon everybody who's put into a foreclosure process. Uwe and Scott will actually be dealing with the contractual beginning of that process, what they do at the start of the mortgage process, which Scott's identified some really interesting aspects of. But for Daryl, he's right at the other end of the process. He's actually been evicted once from the house and went back for very specific reasons. Daryl's been spending a lot of time and effort as he's gone through this process, educating everyone he comes into contact with, the judges, the clerk of courts, the solicitors, the bailiffs, the enforcers, the policemen, everyone involved, even the guy who actually turned up with the truck. This is fascinating, Scott. You'll enjoy this one. The guy who turned the other day, which triggered this event that we're going to describe, was working for a company who manages foreclosed property for the banks. And he is a removalist, and he and his son came with their truck to Daryl's place. And after a short discussion with Daryl, where this fellow not only admitted, but told Daryl that he'd actually seen Scott's video, Frequently Unanswered Questions of the Australian Government, and was trying to work out whether the Canadian government was a corporation, and Daryl was actually able to show him on the SEC website that the Canadian government was a corporation. So he was not cooperating with the people that sent him there. He actually turned around and said, "No, it's unlawful. We're not going to take this man's property," and refused to do so. So Daryl, I've been filling him in with a little bit of the story. You're back in with us, Daryl?
Yeah, I guess I dropped offline, so I don't know what transpired. And I guess you were talking about the guy, the mover.
The mover, yeah. Well, we'll have to keep it fairly short. People can get a lot more detail out of the interview that we've done. But essentially, Daryl, you just need to explain why you went back to the property first, because I jumped in with the information about about Dave, the truck driver. But if you want to start at the reason you went back to the property.
Okay, it was about a week, and we've had that interview. You have the tape when I'm discussing the situation with the alleged police there and the alleged sheriff or the enforcement officer. Well, what transpired is I was going by one of my other properties, and they had actually hooked on to one of my big trucks, and they were about to take it. They had no documentation or anything. The police were called, and the cops asked them if they had the appropriate paperwork, and which they did not. So at that time, they were ordered to release the truck and leave it there. But during the conversation, I found out they had already broken into one of the bays, and they had stolen another a large truck. Later that afternoon, I went back to my residence only to find out that a Bobcat loader was also stolen. So we're looking at approximately $40,000 vehicles and equipment that has been removed from my property, unbeknownst to me. So under the criminal code, I have every right to protect my property. It's called the color of right and claim of right. So I went back into my residence, and I stayed there for approximately 1 month. And during that time, no one from the property management facility came and checked on the residence. They're supposed to, I'm going to say it's probably about 3 or 4 days. They're supposed to legally check to make sure there's no damage, no fire, no, flooding, etc. But none of this transpired while I was living there. And I would have only gone out, maybe a couple times a week to get groceries, but no one actually showed up to the residence.
So on the day when they did, there was a truck with 2 operators, plus at least 1 representative from the management company.
Yes, that's right. I noticed this vehicle backing in at the top of the driveway, so I took my camera out there. I took one of the filed flyers, and I took pictures of all the people. I believe there was 4, 3 vehicles and 4 individuals. I said, "You're trespassing. You don't have permission to be here." I gave them the flyers, and the truck driver, actually I invited him down for coffee, and we started talking about some things. He was reading the flyer, and he was quite interested, and I told him that Canada was a corporation, and he said, "I knew that." He spent about 20 minutes there. I printed off documents for him. He was rather excited that all this stuff was now forward. He knew it, but he didn't have proof. And a police officer showed up, and she was invited in also, and asked if I was a free man. And I responded, I said, "Why, are you a slave?" Well, we got a chuckle out of that one. Then about 10 minutes later, and I was back at the table talking with the moving guys, and 2 plainclothes officers showed up, and they became aggressive. I asked them to leave because they were trespassing, and under the claim of right and color of right, under the criminal code, I was legally defending my property peacefully. They then grabbed me and put me up against the counter. I protested. I said I did not consent. I asked them to leave, and they handcuffed me. I then asked my guest to phone 911 and tell 911 services that there was a kidnapping in process, and gave them the address. I was then hauled outside.
So that call's recorded, of course?
Yes, and I believe there's actually 2 calls made, because as was in the back of the car, of course, the radio, the call came over the radio with the address saying that there's a kidnapping in process and officers to respond, which, of course, they came out on the radio and said, "Well, we're already here."
Now, after that point, when they took you to the local police station, you actually ended up imprisoned for 3 nights and 4 days.
Yeah, that's correct. The first night, or the first day, I was brought to a holding cell, just with a concrete bed, no pillow, no blankets, anything. Lights are on 24/7. I was not fed any breakfast or lunch. It wasn't until about 7:30 or 8 o'clock that I was given a bag of McDonald's and then allowed to make phone calls to find an assurity. But during the afternoon, the 2 police officers, acting police officers, came to the cell. They were given paperwork, and they indicated to me that I was going to be probably given a ticket and released later. However, one of the officers who was aggressive took it upon himself. He was going to phone the property management company and the bank to determine what would happen. He came back approximately 15, 20 minutes later, indicating that they wanted to press full charges against me for forcible entry into my own residence.
So they went back to the bank for instructions.
That's correct. They did.
So who do they actually work for, Joe?
Well, they obviously work for the bank, because if they indicate to you you're going to get a ticket for trespassing on the property, but then they have to make a phone call to determine if there's going to be charges. And now we're talking criminal charges. At that time on the Tuesday, it was only one charge of forcible entry. The next day, I was arraigned in front of a justice of the peace. Now, you have to remember, this is a first-time offense. I have no criminal record, nothing. I am not a threat to society. I was late shackled and handcuffed and brought into the courtroom. There is what they have is terms and conditions of the assurity. Normally what would have happened on a first-time offense is an individual is released on his own recognizance with a promise to appear, with no money put down as part of the bail. This was not the case. In actual fact, the terms and conditions were there was a blackout, a media blackout, which the judge read in the courtroom. In addition, I was not allowed to contact anyone. I could not use a phone or the internet, and I was restricted from going back to my property within 500 meters. And I had to be accompanied at most hours of the day.
That does not sound like anything but censorship and political suppression.
And that's exactly what it is, because they don't want the information out that the banks are nothing more than criminal organizations, and that's who controls the court system. Now,
that would appear to be the case.
I refused to go with those conditions. And the assurities that I had there were very upset. They were fearful that the police would be coming after them. So I said, I won't put you in jeopardy, and I went back into custody. That night I was taken to another facility, and same sort of thing, just a concrete bed, no blankets, no nothing. Lights are on, and I was fed there, however. I did request to make twice. I did request to make phone calls to arrange for a surety the next day. That was denied. I also requested, when an officer came by, to do a tape deposition in front of a couple investigators under oath, which was also denied. I was taken to court the following day and held in a holding cell at the bottom of the courthouse. And then in the afternoon,
Gerald, were you actually in chains while you were in holding?
Yes, you're in holding. You're in leg shackles. The handcuffs are removed, however. Mm-hmm. And then in the afternoon, I was taken to a minimum and maximum security, where I actually had a bed and a pillow and some blankets and a hot meal. So that was good. And
at what point did you actually successfully contact someone to give surety? Was it on during that second day?
Yeah, once I was in that holding facility, which, by the way, is a private prison. There are 2 phones there, and you're allowed to collect calls. I was able, within a couple hours, to arrange a surety for Friday, and I was released. The conditions were limited, or weren't as limiting as they were on the first day. So I still have to report in.
I think we may have lost Daryl again there, but I do know the conditions were that he had to report in. He had to stay with the people acting surety. There was no suppression. The Crown Solicitor was actually, in the end, in agreement that it was actually censorship, and took those off, because I think the system at that point recognised that was not going to be successful. Now, had they actually been successful in getting Daryl to agree to that, he would not have been able to do this interview today without breaking that order and actually being able to be pulled back in. So hopefully we'll get him back in a minute. He's dialing back in now. But the whole process was clearly designed to try to get Daryl to agree, to allow him, consenting, to allow himself to be completely stopped from communicating with the public by publication on the internet, by phone calls, or any form of contact with his, in inverted commas, followers. So the whole process should have been a ticket in and out in a couple of hours, and it turned out to be 3 nights and 4 days, and a whole lot of terms and conditions put to him which were refused and eventually whittled down to some minimum ones. Gerald, just list your the final terms and conditions that you signed off on.
Terms and conditions, I have to report in every Monday to a police station, and I have a hearing on Wednesday, and I'm not allowed to go back to my property. I have to remain 500 feet away. But the other conditions, not being able to use a phone, the internet, and talk to people, has been removed. I refuse to accept those conditions.
Now, the actual charge, forcible entry, that's a criminal charge. And when you go back to court, and we discussed this yesterday, they are going to claim that you broke into their property, which gives you an opportunity in a court who will put a higher requirement on evidence, that is, because it's a criminal court, and you can actually ask them to prove it, because on the books, it's your property.
That's right. Now the burden of proof is on the Crown to prove that this is whose property it actually is. I have a claim of right. We have a video recording of that. We have documentation. The bank, in the first instance, when the civil procedure, they have to provide no proof of who the actual owner is. All they do is point to, well, you failed to pay your mortgage, therefore we're foreclosing under this administrative act. In this case, we have a criminal hearing where the burden of proof is now on the Crown, and the argument will be, okay, who is the legal owner? Let's show it.
Because on their own paperwork,
this way we can bring...
As you said before, their own paperwork shows this is the property you trespassed on, and your personal address is at the same property. So even in their own paperwork, it's saying that you trespassed on your own property.
That's exactly right. Now, as an individual, possession is 9/10 in the law, and under the Constitution Act, no one is to have their property illegally removed without due process of law. And that's what they have done. There has been no due process of law.
So the upshot, Daryl, is you've had a very interesting week, and you managed to educate a few people on the way through, particularly the guys in the final prison that they put you in on the last night.
Yeah, they got a chuckle about that a person's arrested for breaking into their own property. We also talked about some things within the facility that training and education, instead of just locking people away and confining them to a small confined space, providing them basically no reading material, etc. Very, very eye-opening for me.
That appears to be the system. Now, the entire process they put you through seemed to be aimed at discouraging you from taking any further action against them. Now we know it'll actually have the opposite effect, obviously. Now,
just for everyone out there, I was held captive in Tehran in 1988, and I was treated better there with the Iranian National Guard than I was here in my own country. And that is sickening and saddening to me.
Indeed. Oh. Indeed. Well, you can catch the full details of Daryl's sojourn with the system from last week on the interview, which will be posted before tomorrow's show on the OPPT website, and probably on some of the blogs that normally repost things, American Kabuki, Releasing the Shackles, KP, Brian, etc. And have a listen to the series of events that went through. There's a lot more detail on there. And, just just spread it out. Point other people at it, because this is how the system works. And Daryl, I got the distinct impression that they were very, very nervous that there would be crowds gathering outside the courthouse, that there'd be a massive backlash, and they seemed determined to try and head that off.
Yeah, they did. I know when I was in the prisoner's box there, the judge refused to look at me, and he stated that there was a publication ban, and the media that were present could not publish anything.
Gerald, one of the questions that we, when I say we, probably Scott and I muse on quite regularly is we're finding evidence, strong evidence, proof that these organisations are corporations. One of the things that's most difficult to find is exactly who the owners and shareholders are. Have you ever gotten to the bottom of that particular rabbit hole for the corporation that is Canada? Who owns Canada?
It is a Crown corporation owned by the House of Windsor.
So it's actually a property of the Queen of England.
And then you can take it further. Actually, Canada is registered in Washington, D.C., and then we know all the corporations and all the central banks are owned by King of Kings, who wants it shut down.
Well, on that subject, let's take a quick look at the blog that one of the gentlemen who tends to publish material for the Swisindo organisation from a couple of days back had another document from them.
Yes, Chris, actually, before we jump into that, I think what needs to be known here is that people think they have a central bank, and I'm going to use the example of the Bank of Canada. The Bank of Canada does not belong to Canadian citizens. It does not belong to the government. It is a private bank, all right? And when it was first chartered, its charter was to provide loans to provinces and municipalities interest-free. Okay, that's when it was first chartered. It was incorporated also in 1934. So if we look at it from a business perspective, and you have a company, and you have a printer there called your bank of your company, and you can print out however much money you want interest-free as a business, why would you go and borrow money from overseas investors and pay 3%, 4%, 5% interest? From a business perspective, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
I'm sure
None
the
think about
frustrated.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, Lisa. I was just thinking that all of the countries that are involved in the corporate system that is the Commonwealth, they all are indebted to the IMF. So, what's our own Reserve Bank doing? Why are they loaning money to us at interest if we own them?
Mm-hmm.
Chris, I'll show you. I'll give you an example of an investigation when I was going through the documents and the bonds that they're selling. Okay, so their claim is they're going to raise money from overseas investors. So they're bypassing the Bank of Canada. So they're issuing bonds to, for instance, in February of 2012, it was $6 billion that they issued to 6 separate banks. Okay, and on their books, it is no bonds were issued. It's just a bookkeeping entry, and every 3 months, an interest payment will go to for instance, HSBC, Royal Bank of Canada, Ameribank, and I can't remember the other ones. So why are they not issuing certificates, and why are they just paying interest? No money is actually transferred back to the government, all right? All they're doing is taxpayer money is going to pay these banks. And I couldn't figure this out. Why would they do that? Well, they would do it if you want to bleed the country dry, increase the taxes, and bankrupt your country. When you bankrupt your country, then the investors come in and they take your resources.
One of the things I've always wondered is how many sets of books these guys run.
Well, we know they have two because we have two. We have proof of that, and that's been sent to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, showing the actual amount For instance, right off the top of my head, the Native Bank of Canada, as I recall, had $9.3 trillion in off-ledger accounts. Yet they say they have no money.
Well,
exactly. I mean, all we hear about in Australia is the deficit the Australian government are in, or the country is in a deficit, and we owe X number of dollars, and yet no corporation runs at a loss for too long.
Well, the other aspect, we're fed figures by governments and by various departments of governments, and one of the things that I've always wondered is this: where does our tax money actually go to? And are the figures they're giving us about the amount of tax collected and available as budget for the government, are they cooked or not? Because if these are all corporations working in concert with one another, we actually have no idea how much tax is actually paid by the shall we say, the participants from, say, this country. We have no idea how much tax we've actually paid, and whether or not they've just scraped straight off the top and then fed back a proportion of that to keep us permanently in lack. So all that ever happens in the political process is that we're fighting internally to decide whether to feed what's left to, say, education or health or defence or whatever, and literally permanently on the back foot, and then turning around and having to borrow money at interest to do things that really need to be done.
They actually talked about recently the amount of trillions of dollars that had been lost or unaccounted for, that supposedly went to the military-industrial complex, that just goes up missing every year. Just astronomical figures. I mean, there's absolutely nothing that's stopping them from just putting total fluff out there. Kind of like what I think is going on in the stock market right now. I think all those numbers are just fudged into a computer. I don't think there's any reality going on behind a lot of the reports, as far as, I mean, there's no transparency, so they could really do whatever they want, show whatever they want. There's no way anybody could possibly say, "Hey, I'm not buying that as real. Show me the burden of proof." Then they just, they give you the finger and really walk the other way.
This question comes to mind, and when you hear about it and you look at the whole big picture, I mean, if you were an extraterrestrial race and you look down, and you would have to really laugh, because here you have countries going into austerity measures, right? Because they're in this deficit, they owe money. They don't ask the question, what is it that we actually need? Is there enough food? Yeah, there's plenty of food. We've got plenty of, resources to build houses. We've got all of the things that you need are right there. We just don't have the money.
Okay, because
yes, okay, and you look at that and, really, people? Really? Mm-hmm. Oh, we can't do it because we don't have enough digits in this account.
Yep. Guys, we're preaching to the choir here.
I know.
I feel you though, Bob.
Yep.
Daryl,
go ahead, Lisa.
No, I was going to thank Daryl as well, and thanks for the update. And please, if you're interested in following Daryl's story and supporting him, the full interview with much more detail will be up on the opt-in site once Chris has got the final package together, I guess, to go up there.
That's right.
In the next 24 hours, I'd imagine.
Yes,
and
correct.
Daryl, when's the court date? When are you due to go to court?
This Thursday I'll be in court, and then we'll set a trial date at some point in the future here.
Okay.
Yeah. Which I'm looking forward to. We have lots of evidence and testimony.
Great opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Listen,
now we've also said, yes.
Go ahead. Yep. You go ahead.
Okay.
You the boss. You the boss man.
Well, we've also got Scott Nuve here to share some recent events that, although based in Australia, are also global in its repercussions and global in scale in terms of the new website they've put up as well. So, can we move on to that, or was there something you wanted to finish off with first?
No, I'm good.
You're good?
We'll go. Right. We'll jump straight into the conversation with Scott. We're having quite a kind of legal/financial show today, simply because of the events that are taking place, and and my view on them is that, we're actually seeing the system reveal itself for what it really is. And this is another example from the beginning, if you like, of that foreclosure process. And we've got Scott Bartle and Uwe Schaefer. Now, just to introduce them, Scott Bartle, you all should know well by now. He's been actively reverse engineering the system for some years now, in several directions, and he's had a very, very interesting journey. And his when we're done, actually, I'll give you his website and the website that he and Uwe have just put together on the subject we're about to discuss. But our other guest, Uwe Schaefer, is actually a former financial consultant who actually wrote the mortgage contract that we're going to be discussing originally. And he and Scott have done an absolutely elegant job of reverse engineering the sequence of events, and it's all played out, all spelled out on a website they've put together, complete with some interviews in detail of the broad thumbnail that we're going to look at here. So welcome, Uwe and Scott.
G'day.
Hi, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Yep, and look, perhaps Scott, perhaps Uwe, if you just want to give us a quick timeline of when you took out this particular contract and what led you to decide to challenge the basis of the contract just at the end of last year.
Thanks, Chris. Look, I've been in the broking field for about 6 years, and a couple of years ago, a friend of mine sent me the SEC registration of the Australian corporation in America, and that sort of shattered my paradigm of the planet. And overnight, I started researching to the tune where I resigned from broking within about 3 days of reading all this information, because I couldn't face writing another home loan and enslaving another family for 30 years. That was 2 years ago. So over the last 2 years, I did immense research and basically day and night lived and started breathing this whole thing to the point where middle of last year, I did an attempt to challenge my lender and send in a quasi-informal letter asking some questions about the origin of the funds and all this, and they simply brushed it off. At that time, I got very determined, and probably the same month I met Scott. I think it was June last year. And then I started learning about Scott's background and the incredible work he's done, the details and just the structure of what he's put, as you said, reverse engineer the system. This is exactly what he's been doing. So Scott and I teamed up, and we pretty much prepared this in an orchestrated manner to the point where early December we started sending in notices to the lender and gave them 7 days each time. So there were notices asking in a really structured manner, and they're on the website. You can download all the templates and all the forms and have a look at them and even use them if you want. We started sending those in, and within less than a week, their legal counsel won the case. This was just asking questions. We say, the two bottom line questions. There was 11 of them, but the two main ones were: did you actually loan money, or did you transfer our signature, and do you still have the original note? Okay, so these were the two lynch points, which everyone's got a problem with, of course. So within a week, the council was on the case, saying, this is no basis in law, and piss off. So we continued. We send them a reminder notice, or we call it a notice of fault for not responding, and then we send them a notice of default, which was on Christmas Day, funnily. Within about
are there any coincidences going on here? Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. So within that 2 or 3 week period, we had put the lender onto the back foot. That they had to provide certain information. And I forgot to mention, that same month I stopped paying the mortgage as well. So we wanted to see what are you doing on the parallel path to enforce the loan. Okay, so we did our enforcement over here, saying you haven't provided any information to the underlying contract, and all you're doing is pointing at the signature. Whilst we wanted to see what they are doing, so they started their process of phone calls, letters, reminders. We had them in what we deem a default position from our end by the end of the year. And in early January, we started invoicing them for their actions based on a set of terms and conditions we provided. And these stipulated, if you call us chasing unsubstantiated debt, it's going to be this much. And you may have come across some of Scott's terms and conditions on his website before. Again, they're also on our website, and we put the link in afterwards. So this went in one direction, and they went down the other direction. However, the moment they reached their default notice, which was mid-February, unbeknownst to us, they went straight to the Supreme Court. Now, the interesting point here is that we initially wrote the loan or submitted the application in two borrowers' names, which is myself and my wife, and Barbara is the only one on the title. We did that for tax reasons at the time, so she's the only title holder. When they served us court documents last Thursday for immediate possession, they only went after the title holder, and even though relying on the underlying contract by name, they call her Miss, not Mrs. They just mention my name in a little sentence on the side, so as if maybe they're divorced or not even together. So they're hunting down now the title holder, going straight for possession. Yes, relying on the underlying contract, however, not relying on the contract. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yes, they're saying the contract is the proof, but it's got both of your signatures on it, and yet we're going after the title holder only.
That's correct, because I'm the one who put them in the corner. All the letters and notices had my name on the top, so the default was actually done by myself. So they're trying to sideline that clearly and to withholding any information from the court. However, they also went straight to the highest court in Western Australia and took a hold of the highest judge, the Chief Justice that we've got there, who from experience we know could be a very difficult one to deal with.
So you think they're a bit nervous, Uwe?
It appears that way. So right now where it's at this very point in time, we are 5 days in of a 10-day notice to make an appearance, or they give default judgment. So we've already formulated a plan where we're putting in a counterclaim in the next 2 or 3 days and putting them on the back foot for being in breach of contract. I can't discuss this at the moment because there are certain points which will certainly give them something to chew on.
Now, the website addresses that we're talking about here is freespeechaustralia.org. Is that right?
Correct.
That's
correct.
The one that is chronicling, that's a good word, this whole process in real time for people, so they can follow along with what's happening when it's happening. The last edit was May 4. So you've got videos there, you've got documentation, and it's very clearly outlining the story as it's in chronological order, which is lovely. And people can participate, basically. And all the documents there, if they want to use them for themselves or have a look over them and see if they may be useful to them in their situation.
Yeah, that's right. Look, if I could ask for some real support in using this information and actually getting on there, leaving comments under the videos, spreading it around, so we can actually put some strong backbone behind this as well. Now, we do have our own backbone, no doubt. However, the more following we have, or following for lack of better words, the more support that we can show. If there is 100,000 video views coming together, I think we've had about 7,000 all up in the first week. And this hasn't really been hit out very hard yet because we weren't really sure which direction to go with the court, but we know now what we're doing. And the next week or two, if we can really push this out there, I think it'll put some wind up their ass. Sorry to say that.
That's okay. You can say that.
Yes, welcome to Australia, folks.
G'day.
The last thing I wanted to do with Scott and Uwe was to have Scott talk for a minute about a couple of aspects of the contract and the way the system actually goes about drawing you into that contract that I found absolutely fascinating when we talked about it last night. So, Scott, which it actually relates to not just the contract that you sign itself, but the application for the mortgage. Scott, do you want to expand on that a little bit? Because it's a pivotal part of the approach that you guys have actually taken, and it's been uncovering more of the system that we need to know about.
Well, that's exactly it. And for those who are still scratching their heads as to why the banks were foreclosed upon, that website of Uwe's is brilliant to give that background as to what they've been, all their deceptive acts and practices. Now, the very first video that Uwe and I did, we pulled apart the basis or the presumption that there's an actual loan. And that video is probably brilliant to actually explore that. And it actually quotes from publications from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Chicago, and more recently we found another one from the Bank of England in their annual report that describes how new money is created when loans are made. Now, of course, that requires someone to walk into the bank to want a loan, which brings you to be the origin of new money. Now, if you're the origin of this new money, then there's no loan taking place. And what goes on is the application form is treated as a promissory note and is essentially converted. The banks perform a conversion service where they convert it from a promise into this other form of promise, being cash. And so at that point, if you took your application form in conjunction with the deposit that you put down to buy a property, the vendor is already paid by the time this application form's been converted into cash. And so all Uwe did was, when he put the notices to the bank, it said, could you please demonstrate that you didn't do this monetization of this application form in accordance to the guidelines that you banks are publishing. Now, they've completely ignored it and want to focus on the contract. And this seems to be supported by the courts. They only want to explore the contract, as in the mortgage. Now, if your vendor has been paid by the deposit that you provided and the converted application form that in conjunction pays the vendor, then there's no need at all for a mortgage. And so what's happening when you get into court is all the banks are doing is holding up the contract, the mortgage, and saying, is this your signature here, sir? And of course you say yes. And then the judge says, oh, well, okay, well, in that case we'll move to judgment and you have to pay. And any challenge to the basis of that contract is completely ignored, and even bringing up those questions.
It's clearly evident. You can see it, that they're following a script. And when you divert them from that script, they just go right back to, what they know, where they want to take you, because they're following a script. And those questions take them completely off the script because there's really no answer without incriminating themselves.
Well, it's like the equivalent of being a prisoner in jail and complaining to the guard that you're being mistreated,
By that guard?
By that guard, yeah. That's how sad it is.
Yeah.
I think it's clearly demonstrating, people who hear this story, watch those videos, it clearly demonstrates who the criminals are. I mean, they're showing themselves for their true colors.
Exactly. And I mean,
I was just going to say, the reason for the focus today on what seems to be banking and financial is because, in my opinion, it's the IUV system that has the announcement of the IUV system, which has really started to unravel it all. So people can see it for what it is and really get their heads around that they are the value. If they understand that paperwork aspect of it, the way the banks absolutely work, the banks know that you're the value. They've always operated based on that premise, that you're the value. They've convinced us that cash and gold and silver are the value and that we have to exchange our value for it. But that's not actually how they operate. So when people can see it exposed like that, it makes it a lot easier to get their heads around the fact that they are the value, and that's why the IUV system will work. That's what I think.
Yeah, Lisa, may I say something here? There's a couple documents that I think we have on the opt-in website. One is called Modern Money Mechanics, published by the U.S. Federal Reserve, where it shows the debt credit entry that Scott was talking about earlier. And the other one I think we need to get on there is the history of banking, which shows everything about 3,500 years ago up until now. And this is excellent for people to review.
Is that the Money Masters one, or is that a different one?
It's a different one.
Different one. Okay.
History of banking. What we have sent you is, 1 or 2 pages only, but I think it's approximately 90 or 95 pages. But we'll get that so people can download it. But Modern Money Mechanics explains how they create money out of nothing just based on your signature.
Yeah, that appears to me to be the key. If you look at the picture of what Scott just described, when you sign the note and give them your deposit, you just paid for the house.
That's right.
But they don't tell you that. They leave that fact out, and they turn around and they offer you a contract to pay them some money for a debt that doesn't exist. They create the debt for you and then convince you to pay it off.
Now, here's where the additional fraud comes in. Under the Modern Money Mechanics, at 10%, they take and monetize that. And for instance, if it's a local bank, they will sell that note. It's a $100,000 mortgage. They will sell that note to the central bank. The central bank will then give them $900,000 based on that, based on what they have to have in the bank. So, in effect, your mortgage has been paid off, again, by the next one, by the next bank. And that central bank will sell it, perhaps, to another central bank or to the BIS, who does the same thing, now gets $8.1 million for that $100,000 note.
Securitization process.
And you know what the sad part about this whole thing? The poor guy who went in for that loan is now going to work 40 hours a week, and then they're going to tax that on top of it to pay back that loan with interest.
That's right. And now, talking about interest, we're talking about LIBOR, all mortgages, securities, RRSPs, credit cards are tied to the London Interbank Offered Rate, which has been proven that these banks have colluded amongst each other to steal money from the people. Barclays Bank was fined $453 million for their interest rate rigging, and HSBC was fined $1.95 billion for their involvement in the interest rate rigging and drug money laundering.
And that was the biggest crime, the biggest financial crime in the history of finance. And what they paid, Heather's talked about it before, what they paid was cost of doing business. When you're talking about dealings in the trillions and they get slapped with a $500 million fine, they're behind closed doors laughing their asses off at that.
Yeah, I have to point out that it's what they call a rounding error in mathematics. Where you increase the 0.5. If it's 0.6, it becomes 1, or if it's 0.4, it becomes 0. It's a rounding error, folks. They don't care. And the thing I found really extraordinary about LIBOR is that it was about 15 minutes on the news, and then it disappeared. And as you said, Brian, biggest financial crime in the history of the planet. Yeah, who went to jail? Did anyone go to jail?
Who went to jail?
Nobody.
Nobody.
But Daryl, you got to spend 3 days there.
I went to jail.
Yeah.
I wasn't even found guilty yet.
And look, again, we have to thank you, Daryl, for everything that you're doing. It's an absolutely outstanding process you've put yourself through. It's just fantastic, and we do appreciate it.
Yeah. Absolutely, Daryl. Big time. I was so excited to see Daryl's little icon flashing on my screen today when he was calling, because I hadn't heard if he was in, if he was out, and it was like, Daryl! Oh, such a relief.
There you go.
Yeah, Brian, I do want to move on to this latest document from Swiss Indo, but before we do that, let's finish off with Scott and Uwe. Where are things at the moment, and what's the message you really want to get out there today?
Okay. Do you want me to cover that, Scott?
Go for it.
Cool. Well, right now, as in timelines, we are basically pushed a bit by them trying to railroad as fast as they can. They're really trying to rush it. They, at this stage, think we're not represented. So we're still tossing up whether we actually will use legal counsel to assist us. I've spent a long time with a barrister yesterday who said we have a very strong case to really, make it difficult for them. But obviously that'll cost a heap of money. And the other question is, will we self-represent and push forward to stop them in their tracks? Otherwise, they could have a default judgment within 5 or 7 days, which obviously we don't like.
That would be the fastest foreclosure on record.
Probably would. Less than a couple of weeks.
Yeah, well, that shows you how nervous they are.
Yeah.
Because I think Scott's really uncovered the core of the deception.
Yes, undoubtedly. And by us putting it to them, I don't know what devil was riding me at the time, because we're talking about the family home, but somehow I just couldn't stop it. I said, enough is enough. We can no longer take this.
Sure. And how does your partner feel about this process?
We call it roller coaster.
Yeah, understand. Look, Uwe, again, as per Daryl, it's an absolute service to humanity that you guys are performing here by forcing the system to reveal its corruption. And this is the harsh light of absolute truth shining on something that's been going on in the dark, in behind closed doors, with the curtain drawn, for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Variations of this process have been carried out against us, and it literally is just stealing our energy, and it has to stop. So,
Chris, the inner feeling I've had for several weeks now is that I'm almost laughing about this. I think it is so beyond ridiculous. In my opinion, it's all gone already. I'm not even talking about OPPT. I'm just talking the energetic event. That is completely gone. It's uncovering, and it'll come out, and people will go, what happened? It'll be just like a whirlwind come past, and people go, whoops, what was that? So I feel we're already in that space. So I'm not even scared anymore. Initially, this was a lot of apprehension whether we want to do this or not. But now I feel that it's a done deal. It's a given. It will collapse. It will go.
Well, you, Uwe, Scott, and Daryl, I mean, you guys are true patriots of our time. I mean, you're really setting the bar on what doing is like and not paying energy and buying into the old paradigm. And that's how it's done. If everybody did that, we'd have a game-changing situation overnight. And I believe that we're getting there. It's funny when my girlfriend was like, "Well, what do you mean you're not going to make your car payment? And what do you mean you stopped paying your taxes and you're not going to pay your credit card bills?" I said, "Babe, this is my work. This is what I do. I can't possibly go on the radio every Monday and Tuesday and show support for these things and still continue to follow the old paradigm rules and buy into that old structure. I'm just not going to do it." Now she fully understands. She gets it. She's understood that this is the position and the role that I chose, and one that I'm doing to lead by example. And you guys are really taking that to a whole other level. So thank you guys, all of you, so much. You're an absolute inspiration.
Now,
Lisa, do you real quick before we get to that, do you want to read, or do you want me to read the story of the woman that had the Westpac Bank experience? I think that's pretty relevant. I think that's pretty relevant right now. This was sent. Lisa, you posted this in one of the Skype rooms this morning. I posted it on my blog. I'll put the link into the chat room here right now. This is a cool story from a woman who went into Westpac Bank. Her name was Valentina, and I'm just going to read for you.
Bank, and she went into a Melbourne branch.
Yeah. Oh, is that what it was? Here, I'm putting the story in Skype now. Here's one for you opters. I was just in the Westpac Bank. Had to put some money in my credit card. Yes, I would love to give them a courtesy notice for it and close it, but with traveling and having to hire a car, they won't take cash, only credit card. Anyway, when I paid, the teller said, "Review," in quotes, came up on her screen for my account, and she passed me on to speak to someone else. I was curious and interested because I knew I was going to mention the foreclosures I had been wanting to for a while. So we sat down, and she looks on the computer screen and then says that I am eligible for another credit card. And I said, "Really? Even with the collapse of the whole financial system and foreclosures on all banks, they are still offering extra services?" She was taken aback and very surprised when I said it, but she did say yes. I then asked her if she was aware of the foreclosures, and again she said, yes, I know. So guys, they all know, even your local suburban bank outlets. I finished by telling her I will wait to see what happens because I feel lots will very soon. So the word's gotten out there. I mean, this story is a great illustration of everything we've just been talking about. I mean, we have to assume at this point, especially considering this story, that it would apply across other banks as well as law enforcement departments and various governments. I mean, we had the story for that one guy reported in Australia talking about the law enforcement actually having a meeting, a closed-door meeting to talk about this and how to handle it. So despite what anybody's saying, the word's definitely getting out there.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that's why they're responding the way they are to Uwe, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so you're going to ask me about the Swissendo update.
I am.
To talk about?
Yes,
okay.
please.
Okay, I actually posted, here I'm going to put it in the chat room, I put it in a little while ago, a blog post from one of the popular blog sites that Swissendo uses to report on various updates that's taking place with their group and some of the activities they're involved in. They post some of the articles that I put up on Swissendo on their blog as well. One of our contacts is the guy that manages that blog. And he sent me a link to the most recent posting, which I believe went out on Friday. And essentially what it is, it's the Declaration of Absolute Freedom, the One People document that Chris and company put together. And the
actually, Brian, it's actually more than that. It's actually the oath and bond to become a protector, which is actually, if on a scale of importance, the making an oath and bond to be a protector of the one people is a very, very significant move for the King of Kings, and it's a commitment at a higher level. The Declaration of Freedom is one's personal claim to be absolute and to be free of all debt, etc. But this is actually a commitment to assist the one people to free themselves, which plays directly back into the original document they put out, the big 26-page document, where it appeared to be doing a whole lot of things for exactly that purpose. So it is definitely the oath and bond,
right.
and the text in the document you've published prior to that appears to be a restatement of some of the core aspects of the previous large document that they put out, and I'd like to get Daryl's comment on it. It's written in terms and mentions things, most of which I just don't know the significance of. There's little bits and pieces, but anyhow, my view on the actual text of the letter, it actually begins, it's to the members of the United Nations. It says, "Dear all members of the United Nations, dear Sir, United Nations UN must support into the return," and then goes to list a whole lot of organizations, a very long list of organizations, and my interpretation is that because if you go through the 26-page document, you'll see all of these organizations mentioned at various points. It seems to be a summary. To me, it's a hurry-up. The 26-pager was actually out, Brian, a month ago?
About that, yeah.
About a month ago. So it's been.
So when you say the 26-pager, you're talking about the orders that Swissendo or Sino, the King of Kings, sent to the UN, saying, basically ordering them to acknowledge the UCC filings, acknowledge the foreclosure, and follow up on the military orders that were filed.
Yeah, and most significantly, it assigns budget for the process of the military enforcement, and specifically mentions the military order. I mean, it's if you could say what came from the work of the OPPT, well, two things. Once the OPPT had sort of terminated itself on the basis that it was no longer, it had finished its work, what we're left with is the one people. And the other thing that came out was this order, apparently from the the person who is in behind the scenes, the head of our entire system, the King of Kings. And that's with a banking document that we'll repost onto the OPPT site, which is an explanation which I'd never seen of how the actual, if you like, how the actual royal family's system began, developed, and its current form, and how it relates to the development of the financial system, is explained in a way that I've never seen before. It's an absolutely extraordinary thing. Okay, I'm not sure. I can't tell you that it's truth, but it's got a hell of a lot of detail in there, and it's an extremely interesting and informative document. But it just completely reflects the fact that the King of Kings has always existed behind the scenes. And here he is with his details, not his wedding signature, which would have been fantastic. But we're seeing an indication from him that he is committing to protect the one people and move this disclosure forward alongside something which appears to support the original document, which, as Lisa just said, has got a whole lot of literally orders in it about what's supposed to happen next. Now, you can imagine the UN being who described it as a traffic cop on Valium. It'll be sitting on a whole bunch of people's desks going nowhere while they argue about what they're going to do with it. And here is this gentleman actually giving them a hurry up and saying, yes, I'm committed to doing this. Get a move along, folks. We'll see what comes next.
Here, let me actually read one quick thing. This is from that history of banking document. There's the M1 plan, I guess, is kind of summarized. They called it the plan of the experts. They feel it's part of the divine plan. I'm going to read this verbatim. It says, it's driven by a genuine attempt to better the fate of all mankind and bring them all into a material level of comfort, after which man is free enough from daily troubles to pursue mankind's ultimate goal of unity with God for each and every one. It is a long worked upon plan of unifying the world for as good as possible, for as many as possible. That was their basic guiding principle. So that's how I understand it.
Now, it says here in this document, he refers to himself as, let me find it, King of Kings, IHM, Big Top Royal, K681, King of Kings. Is that in reference to he is the 681st in line to hold that position?
Well, the 681st holder of the position is my understanding of it. So this line goes back, allowing 20 years per occupant, which I'm not sure how that would work out in terms of accuracy, but that goes back 13,000 years. So we're talking about a line of succession that has always been present throughout our history, going back to before Atlantis, if that information is accurate. Fascinating thought, folks.
Yeah, very.
Indeed.
And again, I'd love to sit down with the folks down at Swiss Indo and get an actual interpretation of some of the stuff they write, because it's almost impossible to interpret it from our position here, except to get an overall take. So interesting times.
People are wondering why it's only happening now, and I'm going to give you my very limited perspective on this. Is that what we're dealing with is a group of individuals who are, and always have been, cloistered to a certain degree, and surrounded by, in their inner circle, their outer circle, and their extended reach by corruption. Mm-hmm. And they have not been able to pave a clear path through that corruption in order to achieve their goal. And the last time they had tried to do that was with Kennedy back in the 60s. Mm-hmm. That was the furthest they got in recent times. And that's now only as a result of what the OPP did with their filings that cleared a path for them.
That's exactly how I understand it as well, Lisa. And that history of banking document is what tells that exact story. And essentially what happened was when the monetary system got put into play, all the corruption commandeered the authority of this M1 King of Kings. And it just got so corrupt and broken that it was part of their heritage, it was part of their legacy, but their hands were tied to act on anything until the UCC filings came into play.
One of the things I wanted to remind everyone, way back during the original, maybe it was the second Heather interview, Brian, I'm not sure, but everybody asked, well, what is it that can we do? What can we do? And Heather mentioned you're already doing it. Your comments on the blog, the radio shows, the different videos that are placed up, all of this, they are paying attention to. So to answer that question, it's happening now because we're happening now. The fact that they even mentioned the public trust in their declaration and in that executive order tells you why it's happening now. We're happening now. And this is something that really should empower people, because everybody, I have had this conversation. I'm sure each one on the panel and everyone listening has had this conversation with some member of their family, and, well, what can I do about it? Comes down to, or one person can't change the world. Well, yeah, it can, and it has, and it is continuing to do so. So everybody give themselves a pat on the back, a round of applause, because you're the ones that are doing it.
Yeah, every the things that Uwe and Scott are doing, that Daryl's doing, everyone around us is doing in their own way, putting energy into this process of moving us out of a really old and completely corrupt system. And we're not too sure exactly what we're stepping into, but it will make it work. And that's the thing. If we, the concept of the one people is the other thing that came out of the one people's public trust. Just knock off the public trust, and you're left with the one people. And I have to hats off to Heather and the other trustees. They've pulled us through an educational process that we really could have taken decades, right? And they've pulled us through it in a few months, which is extraordinary. And it's had the same effect on the guys down at Swissindo. They have responded at for them, unprecedented speed. Normally this sort of thing would take years to organise, and yet within literally weeks of seeing the work the OPPT did, they're issuing an order that will change the planet. Like, really? Wow. So they must have got an absolute energetic blast from the result of everybody's attention and efforts on this score. As Lisa said, I agree with her views completely. They're very cloistered, surrounded by circling sharks, and the only thing they can do, they can't make little moves. They can only make really, really big moves that affect the whole system. So they can only do it when the conditions are exactly right. And because they responded with such speed, I'm looking at it thinking they're ready to rock and roll. And here the second document arrives that all it does is support, to a greater degree, what they've already done in that first order. So I am, congratulations to absolutely everybody who's been putting into this, and thank you to the one people.
And speaking of doing, I want to thank our wonderkin, BZ. She's already got the history of banking up on the website as well.
Cool.
There you go.
If anybody's listening that wants to look at that document, because only the people in the chat can see the link, it's posted today on my blog, briankellysblog.blogspot.com.